Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we're going from 1500 to 2000 elo in chess.com rapid games, where I'll be explaining my thought process as best as I possibly can for your education and entertainment. Today we have a Caro Kann Defense, and my opponent goes for the advance variation. You can play bishop to f5 here. Most people recommend bishop f5. Personally, I like the move c5, known as the Botvinnik-Karls defense. My opponent takes, which I would argue is the best line. I can't draw arrows. I'm going to go knight to c6 to apply pressure to e5. You can also play the move e6 to immediately go after the c5 pawn. Okay, knight f3 isn't the best way to defend this pawn, because the problem for white, not a problem, but I would say a slight inaccuracy. Oh, okay, he's going for this line. Is that we get our bishop out, outside of the pawn chain, before we have to lock it shut with the move e6. The way that my opponent is playing this is a really tricky line, because you might think, why can't we just take on e5? And I will show you after the game why we can't take on e5. Now he goes bishop to e3. Again, I believe, can't take... Yeah, we can't take on e5 again. And again, I will show you after the game why not. If I remember correctly, knight g to e7 is the move. Yeah, that looks correct to me. And I believe we will most likely have to take... Oh, no, that I don't think is quite correct. I believe bishop b5 is better, because now we get knight to f5. Again, I'll run you through all of these lines after the game, because this is a really interesting trappy position for white, which is why he's playing it. Well, I'd assume that's why he's playing it. And he goes bishop to d4. Of course, I was applying a lot of pressure to the bishop, so he goes to d4, defending e5 and c5. And if I take the bishop after pawn takes, again, I don't... Yeah, no, I can't go ahead and take on d4. See if you can spot why. But okay. Okay. We could just go ahead and castle. We could also play the move a5 to stop b4, which would obviously support the pawn. I believe queen c7 is also a move we can consider. I don't think it's amazing. We can go bishop e7 and get castled, which is the move I'm leaning more towards, because then some of the tactics with queen a4 with checks don't work. Is there anything else? Take. No, that's just good for white. If we go bishop e7 and b4 and castle, is that a problem? I don't think so. I don't think so. My opponent is playing some really good theory for a 1450 rated player, so fair play to him. But alright, like, if you play the Caro Kann, this is definitely a line that you ought to be, well, try to be relatively familiar with. And like I said, stick around for the analysis, because I'll show you some of the absolutely crazy traps that white is setting. It doesn't look crazy, because I'm avoiding all of the traps, because I know the traps. But I will show you afterwards. They're absolutely nuts, and you don't want to fall for them. Okay, bishop to e2. Somewhat of a passive move, you could argue, but it's not a bad move, that's for sure. I think we can just get castled. And now a lot of the tactics no longer exist, because the queen can never come to a4 with check once this knight moves, which is significant. Okay, my opponent castles. Now the question is, can we win the pawn back? That's a bit more difficult. Now, winning the pawn back immediately isn't necessary, because we do have very active pieces as compensation for the gambited pawn. But we will most likely win it back at some point. If we take the bishop, knight takes, take. I don't like this. So what about this knight takes? If pawn takes... Oh yeah, that's a bit of a problem, because after take, everything is well defended. So probably not that. Queen c7 can be considered, which is a good move to apply pressure to e5. I think I like the move a5 for the time being, making sure b4 doesn't happen, because if white can create, like a pawn chain of like a3, b4, c3, and c5, it's going to be basically impossible to get this pawn back. Okay, so h3 played, which technically we can go bishop h5, because after g4 we can take here. But after pawn takes bishop g6, we just fix white's pawn structure. So I don't want to do that, so we will take instead. In most of these lines, in the Caro Kann in general, when the bishop comes out to g4, if the knight is also on f5, you don't want to go bishop h5 because of g4 mostly. So the majority of the time, if you're prompted with h3 to take on f3, then you just take. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, please drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I would really appreciate it, and I really appreciate the growth on the channel recently. It's been pretty insane, so thank you very much. And okay, how are we going to deal with this? So again, taking the bishop doesn't seem to make any sense. Queen c7 looks good, preparing to apply a lot of pressure to the c5 pawn. Looks very, very decent. What else can we do? We could take the bishop, but I don't see how that helps us, because the pawn takes and the pawns are incredibly secure. I feel like I've done something a little bit wrong at some point in this game, but again, we'll check with the computer afterwards, and hopefully we will all learn something. We can consider a4, just taking more space on the queen side, but I think I like queen c7. I think I like that. Applying pressure to c5, of course, if this knight moves, then we're threatening to take and win back our pawn. And then our position should be better, because I think our pawn structure is better than the white pawn structure, namely because of these three pawns exerting excellent control over the light squares in the center. Obviously, a pretty key theme in the Caro Kann is this pawn chain. But in the Caro Kann, as opposed to the French defense, you first get the bishop outside of the pawn chain and then go e6, so you don't have to deal with the bad light squared bishop. Like, if our bishop was on c8 right now, or on d7, like, it would be a terrible piece. But Caro Kann tries to avoid that. Okay, a3, we definitely should play the move a4, because my opponent is obviously trying to go b4 with increased support. So a4 is a very important move, because if b4 is ever played, we will take en passant, queen takes, and then white doesn't have any b pawn to come to b4 anymore. The reason I didn't play that in this position, for example, is that b4 can be played, and after en passant, the a pawn can take, preparing to come to b4. Here, though, the a pawn is already advanced, so it can never take on b3. Okay. Rant over. Bishop b5. Hitting the knight, but more importantly, going after the a4 pawn, threatening to win it. I don't see any other choice other than queen a5, defending and attacking, also maintaining an eye on the c5 pawn. Bishop b5 looks a bit inaccurate to me, because it just helps me go queen a5, something like rook f to c8, and this pawn is very, very weak. I suppose the move a4 also frees up the a5 square for either a rook or a queen to come to, which we have taken advantage of. I think I was saying somewhere before that we have ideas of rook a5 potentially to apply more pressure. I might be imagining that, but we do have that. But obviously my opponent allows queen a5, which has the same idea. Again, I'm not sold on my queen c7 move earlier, so I'll be really interested to see what the engine has to say about the opening as a whole. And again, I will show you all those trappy lines that I was on about. Here, though, this looks pretty good for me. And white has a few options. He goes queen d3, which is one of the options I expected, defending the bishop, because he obviously doesn't want to allow me to take on c5 and win back my pawn. And okay. If we take the bishop, the pawn takes, we're never winning c5 back. Rook f to c8 looks good. Just applying more pressure to c5. I don't see a reason not to play that. Again, we are ensuring that b4 can't be played, because we will always take en passant. So that's sorted. essentially, what our a pawn is doing, if you take these 3 pawns in isolation, right? Because, I mean, the c pawn can't help out. Our a pawn is effectively freezing 2 of white's pawns, which is really powerful. What white probably should have done is played the move a4, followed by, like, I don't know, rook to b1 and b4 to stop us from going a4, so we can never take en passant if this b pawn advances. As I said, us going a4 immediately doesn't make any sense, because after b4 takes, the a pawn is coming to b4 anyway. a3 seems like a massive problem structurally, because this is a very common setup where 1 pawn can monitor the movement of 2 pawns. Hopefully that makes sense. And that's why I'm investing a lot into defending this pawn. Not just because I don't want to give up a second pawn, but because it is crucial to controlling the white queen side here, which is where white has a 4 versus 2 majority. So, okay, this c pawn is coming more and more under fire. We can't pick it up just yet. Yeah, we can't pick it up just yet, but we most likely will at some point. And okay, how is white going to respond? Well, I suppose a move like rook f to e1 makes sense. Maybe coming to the d file also makes sense. What is difficult here for white is how do you improve any of these pieces? I don't really know. And my next move might be... I actually have a few ideas here. I might have had knight to a7. I might have missed that, actually. Trying to trap the bishop. And if bishop to d7, I just have rook d8. Oh, this bishop is trapped, I think. Yeah, I think the bishop's trapped. I think I could have played that on the previous move instead of rook f2 c8. But I mean, even if the bishop wasn't trapped, I'm still going to win the c5 pawn, and you literally can't defend it. I think white maybe should have tried to play for c4, potentially, earlier. I suppose you have c4 now, which does save the bishop, which is true. If c4 probably takes, and white's position does look very odd, because you can never take here, because I will win the bishop. So c4 is probably the best try, in my opinion. I mean, here, I suppose if knight a7, c4... Well, actually, no, then we wouldn't be winning the c5 pawn. So actually, rook f c8 might be a good move. It might actually be the better move. Again, we'll check with the engine, see what the engine has to say after the game. But this is a great position. Great position. And obviously, we sacrificed a pawn all the way back on move 4. And this is move 17. And we still haven't got the pawn back yet. But I think we are about to. If you're going to play this line with c5, you have to be okay with being down a pawn for a while and kind of developing around it, right? You have to just be okay with that. My opponent's taking a bit of a think here, which is good because it suggests that he is a little bit scared that his bishop is trapped. Again, I think c4 is the move. And I'm pretty sure we should be taking on c5 there. Of course, c4 we should not be taking, because that gives the bishop a way out. Also opens up the c-file for the white rooks to get involved. So what we can do is we can just completely ignore what white is doing with c4, because he can never take, because again, the bishop will hang, and there's no good way to defend the bishop. You can come to d7, but I just have rook c7, and the bishop will have to go back. We do have to ensure that this pawn is defended. That is definitely not the move. He might be trying to sacrifice the bishop here, but that certainly does not work. Yeah, okay, he does. I will check after the game about c4, because I think that was the best idea. Even if it doesn't work, it at least gives white some more chances, I think. So, okay, we should be going and winning this c-pawn now. We are down 2 pawns for the piece currently, so technically it's not game over. But I think it's also useful that we have the semi-open f-file to use. And whilst we have a weak e6 pawn, because the e-file is shut, because of course white's pawn is on e5, white can't really access the pawn via the e-file, can't really use this diagonal either because he has no light squared bishop, and he can't come to g5 to access the pawn because I will just snap. And you could maybe go to d4, but again, I will just snap. I'm not going to take this bishop with the knight. My knight is better than that bishop. I might trade this knight for the bishop, but this knight is very strong. I have a feeling my opponent might try g4 to get a little bit crazy and just try to go at me, which would be a decent idea, I think, to try and create some chaos. If you're down material in a position and, you know, if I'm given time here to consolidate my position, I'm just going to be completely winning and it's going to be hopeless for white. So playing some crazy aggressive moves is probably a good idea to try to complicate the situation and not let me consolidate the position. However, on g4, I think we can go ahead with knight to h4, effectively forcing a knight trade, which is obviously good for us. And meeting g4 with knight h4 is a really common idea in the Caro Kann Advance Variation, because the bishop on e7 just teams up with the knight. Okay, rook a to c1 is not a scary move. That is not concerning. Let's just take on c5. Now g4 isn't such a big deal anymore, because the knight can come back to e7, which is absolutely fine. Previously the bishop was there, so obviously we couldn't. But okay, we're going to put this knight on c6 most likely, swing the rooks over to the f-file. This is just a very comfortable position. Again, I do think g4 is the best try, and he goes for it. We have this interesting move, knight to g3, playing on the fact the f-pawn is pinned to the king, trying to bring the knight to e4, where it will be an excellent piece. And I don't really see a reason not to. Maybe c4 is annoying, but we can just take. We can just take. Yeah, knight g3 is a pretty cool looking move. And also, knight to e7 would block my rook. Although, I don't know, maybe we should be paying attention to the c4 break. Although, if we get to play the move b5, then we will completely shut down the light squares on the queen side, which would be nice as well. We can also consider queen c4. Okay, that's a move. That's a good move, actually. So if knight here, I assume he takes. You can't do this because of this. Alright. What if I just defend my pawn? Oh, wait, no, the queen opens up. Oh, that's smart. That's smart. Okay, well, I should probably come here then. That's a really good move from my opponent. And also, he is threatening this. So this is essentially a forced move. That is a good find. Again, this doesn't work because of queen to f2, which plays in our favor, obviously. I'd rather not be giving up my d-pawn. That was a bit of an oversight from me. But like I said, just because I'm up a piece for what my opponent's going to get 2 pawns for it in total, doesn't mean the game is over. Doesn't mean the game is over. I mean, sacrificing the bishop on e6 might have felt underwhelming, but losing the f7 pawn definitely does create weaknesses in my position, i.e. the e6 square. And because I traded my bishop on c5, my bishop lost control of the g5 square, which, again, is significant. But okay. Okay, let's be pragmatic. Of course, I don't want to lose another pawn, but getting rid of white's strong knight, it seems to be the only course of action that makes any sense. Surprised my opponent's taking a while with this. I mean, this just doesn't work. Like, you can't go for this because I have knight to g3 check, and you have to give up your queen. Rook takes. Wow. I refuse to believe this works, though. Well, I've got to take. I've got to take. So he's threatening this, and he's threatening this. Okay. That's pretty cool. And this is under attack. Alright, I see you. I mean, this is defended, though. Do I have to go g6, allowing this? I don't want to. That's a great find from my opponent. Wow. I mean, I have to take the rook. I've got no other choice there. If I can survive this attack, then all is fine. But I need to survive it first. Yeah, the problem is, if I do something like this, then here, 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 and I'm just losing my rook, if nothing else, to be honest. Maybe g6, knight e6. Do I have queen c6? I might have queen c6. I think. And the point is that your queen is undefended, and if you take my queen, I'll take with the rook, which means my rook no longer hangs. You can't do this because of this. And the important part is your queen can't defend the knight. So the queen can't move, avoid the queen trade, and defend the knight all in one go. The queen also can't attack anything else in the position. For example, queen to f4 doesn't hit the rook, where I wouldn't be able to take because the rook would hang, because this pawn is just in white's way here, which is a little bit of luck, but, you know, that's just how chess goes sometimes. And I think maybe white just has to play knight to g5 and allow the queen trade and try to hold the position. He does have a few extra pawns, but he's down a whole rook. It's not going to be good enough. Not going to be good enough. And for the time being, white's position works because my knight and my rook are completely out of the game. That's what's killing my position right now. But once they get into the game, then the fact that I'm up a rook will be felt, right? That's what's holding the white position together right now. So just rook to f8 when I get the opportunity, maybe knight to c6 or knight to b5 when I get the chance, and then I should make my material advantage felt. Okay, well, my opponent is fighting back very well, so hats off to him. Hats off to him. But he's also getting lower on time, which is obviously good for us. And we'll see how he deals with this. I am so interested to run this through the engine after the game because there is a lot to be learned from this game. Not just for you guys watching, but for me as well. You know, I'm not going to pretend I'm the best chess player to ever grace YouTube, nothing like that. But yeah, I think queen c6 is probably the only move in this position. No, I suppose actually queen to c4 is another move that does the same thing. But yeah, the queen trade just can't be avoided. Yeah, I think queen c4 would have done the same thing. Okay, knight to d4. We have a few options here. We could go rook to c5. Oh no, I think I like rook b6 actually. Yeah, rook b6 looks very strong. Just attacking b2, which, as I mentioned way earlier in the game, way earlier on, or 14 moves ago, the a3 massively weakened the b2 pawn because we got to play a4, and now we are reaping the rewards of that positional idea. Okay, let's offer a knight trade, because obviously that will favor us. It seems that the only way to avoid the knight trade for white is a knight back to f3, defending the e5 pawn. But the issue is that stops the f pawn from advancing, which is good for us, obviously, because it means the e5 pawn is weaker. So something like knight f3, rook e8, rook e2, rook b5, white is down a piece, right? He's down a rook. He simply runs out of pieces to defend the e-pawn with, and you can't advance it because, I mean, I might just get my king involved anyway. Okay. Okay, brings the rook over. I could just snap this, and I think I'm going to. And let's go rook to d8. I'm not concerned about the pawn marching through, because one, my king is very close by. But, I don't know, a move like e6... Okay, no, that would be bad. That would be bad. Okay, maybe I have to be a little bit careful. Because I don't have king to f8 because e7 check forks to pieces. So maybe I should have started with king to f7. Yeah, that... Well, no, yeah, but then king f7, d5. So maybe rook e8? d5... Rook to... Oh, rook to b5 there looks very good. I think e6 is the most testing line. Yeah, he goes for it. But this should be fine, though. Rook e8. I'll admit when I'm wrong. I'll admit when I've misplaced a piece. Got no issue with that. My ego can take the hit. And, you know, I'm up a whole rook. I should be able to sweep the pawns up. Let's go rook d6. The only way to defend... Well, you could do this, but then I would take here. And if take, push, I will block. So you have to go rook to e5 to defend. If king to g7, g5 keeps my king out of f6, which keeps the game going for a bit. But still, I mean, it's incredibly uncomfortable to play this with white. Actually, after rook to e5, I might just go rook king to f8. Yeah, let's just go king f8. I'll go king to e7. The king can blockade the e7 square, and then I can get my other rook involved. So I'm going to alleviate this rook's duties. My opponent might try to play the move a5 and try to overwhelm my position. But again, I'm not too concerned. I can probably just push g5 and then play king f6. Okay. Well, here I just go and win the d-pawn. Rook e to d8. The d-pawn is going to fall. There is no time for any of this. I think my opponent played king g2, so he could meet rook f8 with king g3 or king to f3, defending the pawn so that it doesn't have to advance. Because that would mean the rook is undefended, and king f6 would come with a lot of threats on the various white pieces. But here, the d-pawn will fall, and eventually the white attack will fizzle out. If rook to e4 attacking the a pawn, I might just play b5, just save the pawn, and you can't defend the d pawn. It's not happening, and then I will scoop this up with defense of b5. I'm also very aware of not wanting to allow the rook into a square like f7, where it could be quite annoying and winning some of my pawns. Obviously, the game should be winning, but don't give unnecessary counterplay. I definitely gave some unnecessary counterplay with playing rook d8 in the first place and allowing the move e6 followed by d5. But two rooks versus one rook is a significant advantage, which, you know, lets me off the hook a little bit. Okay, f5 on the board. Let's take. Okay, yeah, that's game over. There's just no way through. No way through. The rook and the pawn monitor the h5 square, the e6 pawn falls, and that's game. Because white is going to have one singular pawn for my entire rook, which is obviously not enough. Obviously not enough. It is important to use the king in the endgames, and I think I've shown that here. Like, if my king wasn't getting involved here, these rooks would actually be under serious be having serious problems after moves like f5, f6, because they can't see diagonally. But when the king is involved, it makes the task a lot easier. I also have rook d2 check, picking up b2 if I want. I mean, everything is winning at this point. Bit confused as to why my opponent's playing on, but hey-ho. Hey-ho. I'm just going to pause the video because I think he might just let the time run. Okay, I judged him too harshly. He did not let the time run. Let's take on e6. g5 is also playable. Okay. Well, he's not threatening anything. He's trying to stalemate himself, but yeah. My rook and my pawn can monitor all of this, and my king can just run over here and make things nice and simple. Come on, bruv. I'm a bit confused as to why he's still playing on, but each to their own, each to their own. Do many of you guys have this when you've got like completely winning positions? You have 11 minutes on the clock and your opponent is just continuing to play on. Seems a little bit unnecessary. Yeah, I mean, you just don't have h5 because I'll take. You can try and push g5, but it doesn't really do anything. At the least, I can go rook d4, check, rook g4. Okay, he resigns. Good game, good game. And yeah, the analysis is going to be really interesting. Okay, so that was actually a better accuracy than I was expecting. 85.8 for my opponent and 94.3 for myself. Now let me show you some of the traps my opponent was setting. So after the gambit, knight c6, knight f3, bishop g4. My opponent goes c3, and the point of c3 is one, to support the bishop when it comes to d4, because obviously we couldn't take it because the c-pawn would take. Secondly, it's to open up the queen. So for example, a very common trap here is you play knight takes e5, and you're like, well, the pawn is not defended, right? Because we're pinning the knight to the queen. And if queen to a4 check, just bishop to d7, right? And we're up a pawn. You're correct, except white can play knight takes e5. And if the bishop takes the queen, bishop b5 check, and the king has no squares to go to. So queen to d7, and after takes, and something like takes, black is down 2 whole pieces, right? Because white gave up his queen, but won the knight on e5 and the bishop on d1 and the queen on d7 for it. So we go e6 instead, which gives the king the e7 square. Now let's say white plays, I don't even know what's a nothing move here. A3. Obviously we can take on c5, but we could also just do take. I don't think we can do take in this position. Because again, bishop b5 here and c4, if I remember correctly, is the idea. And if you take, then you're going to lose. You're going to lose. So it's very, very tricky. So instead, I play the move e6. The best move here is apparently b4. But again, that does allow this trade. And now this isn't quite so strong because after c4, this pawn is adequately defended by e6 already, and we can just develop knight to f6 over protecting the d5 pawn. Of course, we still can't take because of takes. So bishop e3 chosen. Again, we cannot take here because not knight takes, because after bishop d1, bishop b5, we have king to e7, and we save the queen because the king has e7 to go to. But the issue is actually that after knight takes e5, there is queen to a4 check. The knight is no longer pinned. The queen moves with check and attacks the bishop. You can't drop the knight back to save the knight because of queen takes g4. The bishop is undefended. And if you block with the queen, then firstly there's bishop to b5. And after knight to c6, there's knight to e5. Bishop is hanging twice. Queen's under attack. The bishop's pinning the knight to the queen. It's all falling apart. So knight g to e7. a6 is apparently also good, just stopping this. We can also consider taking. And then here, we still run into these same issues of c4. And the bishop is guarding the c5 pawn. So better is apparently just a6 in this position. But we can also play a6 without taking, which is better. I chose knight g to e7, which isn't the best, but it's still good. Knight b to d2, knight to f5, attacking the bishop, forcing bishop d4, only move. If b4 is played, which is the second best move, we just snap, and the white pawn structure is in shambles. We're down a pawn, but it's kind of worth it. So, bishop to d4, bishop to e7, which is the best move. Okay, great. I considered the move a5, but I wasn't in love with it. Yeah, it's not great. So bishop e7. Bishop e2 is inaccurate, so I am correct there as well. Bishop b5 is better, which just poses more of a threat, basically. After castles, take h3, knight d4, and then bishop f5. Okay, so black compensates being down a pawn with having the bishop pair. Open b file could be useful. So, okay, bishop e2. We castle, And now, none of these threats are ever going to occur because our king is out of the center. Best move here is b6. And after cb6, knight d4, knight d4, bishop e2. This is met with this, so knight e2. And then queen b6. So we gambit a pawn. After rook b1, rook f to c8, and we just apply pressure. Okay. And if knight to f3, preparing a knight coming to d4. Rook c4, knight d4, knight d4, knight d4. And the computer just wants to, okay, basically use the open lines against the white pawns to apply a ton of pressure. So, interesting, interesting. I went a5, which is still a good move. b4, of course, can't be played because I'll win a pawn. So h3, I take, knight takes, and again, the computer's screaming for b6. And then knight takes d4. Oh, if knight takes, then takes. So c takes, then queen b6. We're down a pawn, but we have pressure. Okay, I went queen c7, which isn't the best. The computer does not think so. But a3 is also not great, because we get a4 to stop b4, because en passant, and you can see we're down a pawn, but the eval is pretty balanced, because the white pawns are ruined. So bishop b5 is the best move. Queen a5 is the only response, defending and attacking. Queen d3 is a mistake. Okay, so bishop back to d3 is the best move, which makes sense, applying pressure to the knight. g6, bishop f5, probably gf5. And then white is better, bishop e3. But, I don't know, the king can move, bring the rook to the g-file. It can be interesting. But queen d3, apparently, knight d4 is the best. After knight d4, oh, we have knight e5. And if cd4, then knight to a7, and there's no c4. Okay, that makes sense. Keep an eye on distracting this knight and winning the e5 pawn. Good lesson from this video. But queen d3. I went rook f to c8, which is a miss. Knight to a7 is better. c4 I thought was quite interesting, however. The computer wants takes, and rook f to d8. Okay, what's wrong with this? b4? Take, queen b6, knight c5, queen c5, and then, oh, a4, locking the bishop in place. And then, yeah, we're just going to get a relatively equal position here. Okay, interesting. Rook f c8 played. My opponent plays rook f to e1, which is a blunder, obviously. The queen has to retreat to allow the bishop back into the game. But he doesn't. We go knight to a7, which is the best move. Again, I thought c4 should be played, and the computer agrees. I was planning to just take on c5. Computer prefers this, and then this. Okay, knight back to f3. g6 or h6. Stopping these ideas. Okay. The point is, we're obviously not going to take here, because that lets white off of the hook a bit. We essentially want to make it very... Oh, there is this, though. Followed by this winning here. That's actually quite nice. Like, rook to c1, take knight c6. Rook to d1. Yeah, this is obviously just better for us. We're up a pawn. So, and also, yeah, these pawns are controlled by our pawn. Anyway, bishop d7 played. Rook c7. My opponent sacrifices the bishop. Take. Rook a c1. We go bishop c5. Bishop c5, queen c5. And g4 from my opponent, the best move. I should have probably gone knight to e7, just coming out of the position. And after knight to g5, we have knight g6. And after this, we again have queen c4, if take then take. So there's no real way to save e6. We go knight g3, knight g5, knight e4. My opponent obviously could have done this, and then we're going to swing the rooks over to the f-file, and we're going to have a great time. And then bring the knight to c6. We're all sorted. So he plays rook takes e4, which I thought was a very practical decision. d4, queen e4. Our only move is g6. Everything else loses, like, instantly. So g6, stopping this. We give up the e6 pawn, but now we have queen to c6 or queen to c4. I don't really understand what the difference is. Here, oh, the computer wants h6, and this is defended. It really wants to take here with the rook or the knight. Okay, whatever. I wouldn't have done that anyway. I would have just taken the queen. Take, knight d4, rook b6 is the best move. I was considering moves like rook to c5, but I was like, well, f4 comes in, and I know I'm winning, but this is a little bit more difficult. Rook b6 forces rook c2, really, to defend. Knight c6, rook e2. If the knight comes back to f3, we just pile on pressure, something like this. E6 is going to be forced, and this pawn is going to fall pretty soon. Rook d5 is a nice move, just to harass the pawn, and there's no good way to defend it. So rook e2, knight d4, cd4, rook d8 is the best move, really. So, oh, the computer wants to bait the pawn in. It wants to bait the pawn in. Huh. Obviously, I wanted to go king f8, but then we throw the game away, so I can't do that. And I can't go here. See, I thought it was better to go king f7, which is the second best move. Trying to go king here. And if d5, rook b5. If check, then this we blockade. If this, then just here and we blockade. So the king does an excellent job of blockading. But okay, e6, rook e8, d5, rook d6, rook e5. We bring the king to blockade, win the d-pawn. I thought my opponent, after king e7, would try f5. I thought that I probably had king to f6 here, something like rook e4, take, I can take, like, the rook is completely overworked. King g2, I assume attempting to meet this with this. So just rook e d8, you can't defend the pawns, and obviously this is an easy cleanup job from here on. My opponent eventually resigns. This doesn't do anything. 1, we can just sack the rook and win the pawns. 2, we can just do something like this, and this pawn is never getting through. We can win the pawns and promote. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you want to see another very interesting Caro Kann game, check out the video up here. And if you want to see the previous episodes of the speedrun, check out the playlist down here. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.